Michael Kroger, the present strategy of state and federal governments is to lock down everyone and close lots of businesses for around 6 months, maybe more, and meantime spend, well, look, it's north of $300 billion already to keep businesses alive and people with some money in their pockets. Is this sustainable?
No, it's not, Andrew. Things could get worse, of course, but Morrison, Hunt, Frydenberg and the state premiers have done an outstanding job so far. If you look at the top 20 most infected countries in the world, and the statistic to look at is deaths per million of your population. The number of infections doesn't tell you the story because not everyone's testing. But Australia ranks with Brazil, if you can believe Brazil's numbers, as having the lowest percentage death rate of the top 20 countries. I keep hearing about Germany. Our death rate is 10% of Germany's as a percentage of the population. It's only 20% of South Korea's. We are doing incredibly well in this country, and I would have thought, you know, if the rate continues, Andrew, to flatline, give it 4 or 6 weeks, by the middle of May, the government's going to have to start thinking about reopening this country because people are getting absolutely smashed. Small businesses smashed, employees smashed, and this country cannot sustain 6 months. Scott knows that, by the way, but of course governments, the Prime Minister and the Premiers, have to err on the side of caution. But if this goes on for 5 weeks flatlining, you'll see the government, I think, changing its mind and slowly starting to re-establish businesses in this country.
As I said, Steve Conroy, new infections continue to rise, but at a much slower rate. In Victoria today, for the first time, we've had fewer people with the infection. The number of people recovering has outnumbered the number of people getting it. Now, that's obviously not ideal, but should we be preparing for the shift that I keep talking about, where we protect the vulnerable and we quarantine the risky, but ease up on the restrictions so that people can have a semblance of a normal life?
Look, I think you're probably just a few weeks ahead of where a government behaving responsibly can be, Andrew. Mm-hmm. So I'm not disagreeing.
I said that in the papers today, 2 weeks, Steve, if we really put our shoulder to it.
Yeah, so, but I mean, the key here is that the measures that have been introduced over the last 10 days, what's called the stage 2, and now Victoria's moving to stage 3, those are the measures that are starting to bite. And the problem when you're dealing with something of this potential magnitude is you can't afford to wait a couple of weeks before you decide we've got to go harder. You've just got to keep, as the governments have been doing, and there's been a few disagreements, but nothing of serious substance in the National Cabinet about how we can get that graduated step up. So we're at the stage of what I probably call de facto stage 3, though Tasmania's just introduced full-on stage 3 lockdown, fines for going out unless you've got reasons. But New South Wales and Vic are moving to a similar situation. So if we can get on top of it over the next few weeks, then I agree. I've never quite understood the 6-month figure. I agree with what Michael just said. That's the government preparing people for a longer haul than perhaps we may ultimately endure. But if we don't have the 6 months, it's because we've made the hard decisions over the last 1 month. That is what is vital to getting it right. And
yes,
I know.
I think I agree with you. We have made hard decisions, but it's been a blunderbuss approach. I think we've been too soft on things we need to get hard on and too hard on things we can afford to relax on in a couple of weeks, as I said in the papers this morning. But Michael Kroger, with every week that this goes on, I heard again today the Prime Minister, and I know he's doing, as best he can, and I support a lot of what he's doing. He said, after we get through this, the economy will bounce back. We need to preserve all these businesses for the time we bounce back when the virus is under control. Mate, with every week that goes past, we are not going to bounce back. We are not going to bounce back. We'll improve a bit, but we're going to crawl back, if anything.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. And Andrew, what we don't need is the Marie Antoinette set out there, telling us to shut down everything. The public servants, journalists, trade unionists, those from the inner city who've got secure jobs who are not being affected. I mean, we haven't heard from the public sector unions, by the way, about what sacrifice public sector workers are going to take to join in the national effort of sacrifice. Putting aside frontline workers, they're exempt, but everybody else, are they taking some form of pay cut? No, of course it's going to be a long time before we bounce back. But if you look at one other statistic, Andrew, 12,000 people have died in Australia during March of old age, disease or accident, because we have 150,000 people die in Australia every year. So 12,000 have died of those reasons, 18 have died of coronavirus, 4 of those from the Dorothy Anderson, 5 of them from cruise ships, 2 of them from cancer, as you know and you've said, and no one domestically under 70. So
168,
the answer is
serious underlying health issues.
Yeah, and he'd been on a ship. But don't forget this, that there has to be a point at which the government has to take a risk, because until it's such time as there's a vaccine, when the country reopens, there'll still be people getting the virus and there'll still be people dying, and people are going to say, oh, the government went too early. They went too early. Everyone's got to get used to the fact that until such time as there's an antidote, people will still get and die from coronavirus. But, you know, unfortunately, and every death is terrible, but you can't keep a country locked down for 6 months if the infection rate is flatlining and starting to reduce, because you're going to have a lot of deaths by keeping the country locked down from suicide, etc., 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 domestic violence, etc. So there's another side to this coin. But look, Scott Morrison and the Premiers are well aware of this.